Hello. Before I start, I want to mention that this channel, much like countless others, has recently been hit by a near 100% demonetization of videos. A few days ago, about 150 of my videos were demonetized, and just today, the few left standing were also hit. Most of them were hit with that little yellow dollar sign that says little or no advertisements will be shown. So there it is. One of my other channels got clobbered several weeks ago. If you enjoy some or any of the content from this channel, please consider a modest contribution on my Patreon page. See the link in the description below. Every little bit helps. My dear friends, I must present to you one of the best examples of terrible journalism that I have read in a long time. If you can get halfway through and avoid cringing in agony, then you are worthy of a medal. How the teachings of Islam could help us prevent more sexual abuse scandals. Harvey Weinstein is just another case of a powerful man abusing women because we live in a society that lets him get away with it. But we can change that. Oh, really? Well, thank you for diminishing the impact of this horror story that Weinstein's victims must be living through. This is not just another story, and society doesn't let him get away with it. If this happened in Islamic-ruled countries, maybe so. Remember that he is being sanctioned by the film industry for starters, based on accusations, and, most importantly, faces harsh legal penalties for his reported actions if found guilty in a court of law. Qasim Rashid boldly states, "If the Harvey Weinstein sexual abuse revelation shocked you, then you're dangerously ignorant to reality. If this story didn't shock you, then you are dangerously close to being accused of having no conscience." According to RAINN, an American is assaulted every 98 seconds. 1 out of every 6 women will deal with rape or attempted rape in her lifetime, and 90% of rape victims are women. These are statistics you're quoting. In the real world, it doesn't matter if you are the 90% or the 10%. Being on the receiving end of a degrading and horribly invasive crime is a reality the victim will most likely struggle with their entire life. I am a Muslim and a civil rights lawyer with a special interest in advocating for women's rights. Oh, really? Apparently working in a Western democracy, otherwise your job would be a joke, because in most Muslim-dominated countries, women have little or no rights, unless you are counting the recent gain made in Saudi Arabia, where women are actually going to be able to drive cars. Do you think they will need an adult male escort to accompany them for their newfound freedoms? My advocacy is informed not just by the law, but by strategies detailed in Islamic teachings and Prophet Muhammad's example to preempt sexual abuse. Okay, I want to nip this one in the bud. Muhammad, peace be upon the most feminist man to have ever lived, showed his kindness and generosity towards women as told by the majority of traditional hadith sources, stating that Aisha was married to Muhammad at the age of 6 or 7, but stayed in her parents' home until the age of 9 or 10, according to Ibn Hisham, when the marriage was consummated with Muhammad, then 53, in Medina. Well, I don't know about you, but I do believe that's a fine example for people like Weinstein to follow. Yes, the cancer of sexual abuse against women that we see in Christian-majority America is just as prevalent in Muslim-majority Pakistan. I see. All right then, Mr. Civil Rights Lawyer with a special interest in advocating for women's rights. Pray, do tell how the teachings of Islam could help us prevent more sexual abuse scandals. You can't even get it right in Muslim-majority Pakistan. Let's start by understanding 2 facts. First, a woman's attire, alcohol intake, marital status, and education level do not contribute to sexual abuse. Abusive men do. Sorry to be Captain Obvious here, but there are offenders and there are victims. Second, sexual abuse doesn't happen in a vacuum. I can't even imagine anyone even making that claim. Every level of society, social norms, media, and government is complicit in promoting the rape culture that perpetuates sexual abuse. You may be aware that civilized Western countries have this quaint thing called the criminal justice system. There are laws that make any abuse illegal, and Harvey Weinstein may indeed find himself in prison. Since you bring up the religion of peace, Islam, let us talk about rape cultures in countries that are predominantly Muslim. Saudi Arabia is being hailed as so progressive and feministy because of the female driving thing. But what they don't tell you is that Saudi Arabia has no penal code or written law that criminalizes rape, or is there any punishment for it. Not only that, if a woman is in a man's company in violation of religious practices, which is known as purdah, then she, the rape victim, can be punished by existing laws. But there is more. There is no prohibition against marital rape or statutory rape, but it gets worse. Because in Saudi Arabia, under Sharia, the victim and the defendant are both usually targeted for punishment, and in some cases the rape victim getting a harsher sentence. These terrible crimes happen all over the world. That is true. The difference is that countries that have secular governments have laws that are enforced and in the eyes of the law do not blame the victim but pursue prosecution against the attacker. You can cite statistics about low prosecution rates, but we often have a he said and she said case, and there is often a fuzzy area when the perpetrator and the victim know each other or are dating or even married. Yes, I agree that anyone sexually assaulting anyone else is criminal and should never be tolerated in any society. These are difficult cases to prove, and even in the case of Harvey Weinstein, unless you've been abused by your employer or potential employer, there is a super gray area and conflict that exists for the employee that makes it difficult to even act. Your livelihood could be jeopardized, which makes such cases so much more contemptible. An employer or someone that holds some kind of power over you is in a unique position to abuse it. But you're the one who brought up rape culture. You also brought up Islam. Did you know that in Iran, the husband, in his role as head of the family, is responsible for his wife? The government is not to interfere with his affairs. You might also be aware that in Iran, the nature of domestic violence is complicated by both a national culture and authoritative state that support, control, oppression, and violence against women. The government does so by promoting fundamentalist ideas of women as properties of men. It does so by setting up an unequal legal system and not punishing assault even when it has resulted in severe injury or at times even death. The conversation of domestic violence then cannot be simply domestic, but begins to take the shape of systematic violence fueled by tradition, ignited by religion, encouraged by the dominant authoritarian state, and empowered by poverty and illiteracy. We could go down the list of other Islamic countries, and we haven't even touched on honor killings and honor rapes. But I wanted to point out the two that actually have an Islamic-based government. When women are the property of men and have less rights, it is the Islamic countries that have a codified rape culture. Secular governments prosecute, maybe not always successfully, but do target the attacker, not the victim. He goes on to say, social norms demonize a woman for speaking out, victim blaming her by asking what she was wearing, whether she gave signals about inviting abuse, or asking why she didn't speak up sooner. This still does happen, even in countries that frown upon sexual assault. But times are changing, and this defense of the indefensible is becoming less common or acceptable. In real rape cultures, such as Saudi Arabia, women are blamed in the eyes of the law for bringing attack upon themselves. The media also advances rape culture by disregarding women and their voices. Why didn't the allegations against Weinstein gain clout when Rose McGowan screamed them from the top of her lungs years ago? Because she didn't name Weinstein personally. Why has society advanced people like Weinstein, Roger Ailes, Bill Cosby, Bill O'Reilly, and even our commander-in-chief to the pinnacle of success, despite the decades-long testimony of sexual abuse and rape from dozens of women? Okay, Mr. Islam is the cure for rape culture. Let me tell you, until you are proven guilty in a court of law, you are presumed innocent. Countries with a rule of law kind of work that way. But look what has happened to many on your list. Harvey Weinstein has been summarily sanctioned by the film industry and faces possible indictments. Bill Cosby has been standing trial and will be retrialed. Funny for a rape culture to doggedly pursue Mr. Jello. Bill O'Reilly lost a lucrative career on TV. If someone is guilty of a crime, they should be punished. I've never thought otherwise. However, decades of accusations do not automatically make a legal guilty verdict. Like I said, we have this funny legal system that protects the accused until, of course, they are found guilty, unlike many Islamic countries where authorities look the other way. Even in Turkey, a country with a 100-year tradition of secular governance and law, tends to look the other way when a woman complains of assault or abuse by men. They, like Iran, do not like to interfere in the affairs of the head of the household. How can we rely on government when 97% of rapists never see a day in prison? Judges punish rape of an unconscious college woman with a measly 3 months in jail, award rapists with equal custody of the child born from a woman they raped, and the U.S. Department of Education rolls back rules that protect women in college from sexual assault. Unfortunately, we have to rely on governments for prosecuting criminals. Do you want to have roving bands of vigilantes who take the law into their own hands? Kind of like those ISIS guys over there, murdering, raping, and making people their sex slaves. That's right, ISIS stands for Islamic State. So maybe you do want that kind of justice. Our Western justice system doesn't always get it right, but it's the best we can do. There are laws on the books and prosecutors attempt to bring criminals to justice. The fact is, that states are not moral actors, people are. But when people let bad behavior go unchallenged, we inch closer to societal anarchy. In truth, any expectation that we can simply pass a law to stop sexual abuse is foolish. Which is exactly the same argument made by the Second Amendment gun rights advocates. If you pass laws, it will not stop people from committing crimes. You do know that having laws is precisely what keeps anarchy from occurring. But by your logic, we should have no laws. If you want to murder someone, what the hell? Go do it. I think you actually need a civics lesson. Some people are good and always abide by the laws of societies. Others, those contemptible scoundrels, somehow find ways to break laws and get into trouble. Remember, too, that the justice system is intended to provide a remedy after a law is broken. It is not yet possible to accurately predict when a future crime will happen in order to stop it. So for thousands of years, civilizations all over the world have adopted the only practical system for creating and enacting a system of justice. Just because you personally feel that people are getting away with bad things does not mean they are happening or happening the way you describe them. We have a solution that is flawed but works better than anarchy. Despite laws in France that criminalize sexual harassment, an astounding 100% of French Parisian women on public transit report sexual harassment. France's proposed response is legislation to ban catcalling. Such legislation, if passed, will also fail because state laws only punish the actor once the act is completed. They don't prevent the act in the first place. Spot on there, clever Dick, which is how any set of laws work. You cannot pre-punish someone for an act they may commit. This is where Islamic teachings and Prophet Muhammad's example provide a solution that no state truly can. And while there are people who don't believe that sexual abuse is even a problem, some on the left will disagree that accountability to a higher power is a solution. No, people with brains in their heads will disagree with that. This is a reasonable argument, in part, I don't agree, due to the hypocrisy of allegedly religious men like Congressman Tim Murphy, who condemns abortion and infidelity, yet was caught encouraging his mistress to have one, or former Indiana GOP Chair Rick Halverson, who was convicted of incest. Yes, Islam implores accountability to the Creator, but rather than preach empty dogmatic theories, Islam instead prescribes a proven secular model. Really. I want to tell you a story about a man who says he believes in God but does not act the way that lives up to the standards of his faith. This man could be Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or any other faith and still not be a morally perfect being. Why is this? Some, like you just described, are hypocrites, while others are flawed, and try as they might, they cannot live up to the standards of the teaching of their religion. You have pointed out the complete absurdity of allowing deeply flawed people to be arbiters of justice. The religion you choose does not matter. Your measure of laws and justice based on your faith is not the same as another's. Do you propose to punish non-Muslims for not living up to Sharia law? And what mind reader gets to decide who this perfect moral religious person is? Only one person knows what is in their head, and that is the individual. And until we develop mind reading, we cannot judge the moral caliber of others until, of course, they do good or do bad. So we can judge them upon their actions. But we still do not know what is in that person's heart. Islam is exactly the opposite solution to secular models, and we don't even have to be very imaginative to discover why. We already have Sharia law, where a woman's word is not worth the same as a man's. That would be a hell of a poor way to stop sexual predators by saying the rape victim must produce 4 male witnesses and the rapist must confess in order for them to be believed. Yes, sadly, there are places in the world that are already run by your so-called secular Sharia law, and it ain't too pretty for at least half of the population. In a recent international broadcast lecture given live before roughly 6,000 Muslim women, the Khalifa of Islam, chapter 4, verse 2 of the Holy Quran, clarifies that women were not created out of the body of a man or from his rib. Rather, the Quran testifies to the fact that men and women were created from a single soul and are of the same kind of species. You can cherry pick your holy book the same way I can. Quran 2:82 establishes that a woman's testimony is worth only half that of a man's in court. Quran in Surah 2:228 says, wives have the same right as husbands have on them in accordance with the generally known principles. Of course, men are a degree above them in status. Quran in Surah 4:11 says, the share of a male shall be twice that of a female. Of course you know all this and many more just like them. I don't want to turn this into an hour-long video quoting the Quran's lack of respect for women, so I will move on. This verse also commands men to consort with women in kindness, forbidding men from so much as thinking ill of their wives. This preempts emotional and mental abuse. Chapter 4:3-5 furthermore prevents violence against women by forcing men to control themselves and never resort to physically harming women, preempting physical abuse. But in reality, people being flawed and less than perfect than your Prophet Muhammad, they will make mistakes, and when Islam men go wild, they have the safety of the Sharia courts to protect their less than compassionate treatment of women. The Quran further obliges men to provide for a woman's every financial need while holding that anything a woman earns is hers alone, preempting financial abuse. You forget to mention that part, if a woman fails to fulfill her duties, wink wink, you know what I'm talking about, you sly dog, then she forfeits such protections. And when it comes to the Islamic concept of hijab, it is men who are first commanded to never gawk at women and instead guard their private parts in chastity, regardless of how women choose to dress, preempting sexual abuse. So I do recall you rightfully mentioning that women's attire do not contribute to sexual abuse. Abusive men do. So why is it that in Islam, a woman is required to dress in a way that is modest to prevent the salacious gaze of those dirty Muslim men? You attempt to flip this concept on its head by saying women are not forced to dress like beekeepers to protect themselves from filthy male gazes, but in many Islamic regions, they are guilty of exposing themselves and brought on the rape. This is why purdah is practiced in order to stay out of the sight of men or strangers. It falls upon women to protect themselves. It is exactly the same as people advising women in the West to take precautions before going out. You don't want to encourage unwelcome advances from men. You obviously disagree with this advice in the West, but it is the law in many Muslim countries. It is called victim blaming. The writer of this confused and misguided article goes on with several Muhammad anecdotes on how he was the most feminist man to have ever lived. I'm not buying it. He says, Weinstein is a symptom of the greater disease of arrogance, unaccountability, societal apathy, and from men who knew of the abuse but did nothing. Islam and Prophet Muhammad provide a practical solution. We already discussed that solution, and it's Sharia law, and there is little to no benefit for women under that barbaric system. He also says sexual abuse of women will markedly decrease when men stop abusing women and when men stop thinking that just because they haven't personally abused women, they have no further obligations. According to Islam, every man is accountable to stop abuse of women by their word and by their acts. Many abusers like Weinstein walk our streets terrorizing our neighbors. Together we can employ a proven Islamic model that will stop this madness and reinvoke gender equity today in America and the world. This entire article is madness. It is absurd and ridiculous, suggesting that the most brutal and backwards ideology in the world for anyone, especially women, could be used to protect women is beyond my comprehension. Even in the West, where everyone enjoys the most freedoms than at any other time in world history, had a long period of time where the church was the law of the land. Europe has in recent decades shed the religious rule, and with the rise of secular state with constitutional protections for everyone, this part of the world has become more safe and no longer suffers from the current barbaric codes that millions live under Sharia. We are free, and at least half of those under Sharia law are not. The foolish SJW crowd might buy into your crap, but reasonable people do not. Morality is a product of culture, not religion. Islamic people view the Quran as the perfect, unerring word of God. It is an unchanging work. Christians have many versions of the New Testament, and some Christian sects say the book is only divinely inspired, while others see it as a perfect word of God. The problem for morality and Islam is there can never be any progress in human rights under Sharia law as long as the written word is absolute. Christianity has become more moral because of secular morality and governments. They don't go around beheading people or burning or throwing gays off of tall buildings. Not because their religion says not to do it, but because the modern moral world says no to arbitrarily killing people. Something you might not have known about the author of this article that I am discussing in this video. Qasim Rashid is a human rights activist and advocate of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in America. For those not familiar with Ahmadiyya Muslims, they are an Islamic religious movement started by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, who claimed to have been divinely appointed as the Mujahideen renewer of Islam, predicted the Islamic Day of Judgment and end times, and who is to bring about by peaceful means the final triumph of Islam and herald the Eschaton as predicted in Islamic scriptures. Think about this and what might be motivating his ridiculous desire to impose Islamic law upon the world. Is it for social justice or for the final triumph of Islam over all? Come to your own conclusions. Goodbye.